Okay, good morning, everyone. It's December the 17th, 2019. George Webb here from beautiful Port Canaveral, this famous UAE port on the coast of Florida. This is the home of Club K. Remember that Club K deal is a 30-year lease agreement with a Russian general and the guy who ran the Iranian, and before that, the Iraqi nuclear program. So what could go wrong, right? What could go wrong? We all remember that story from Mary Fanning. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about ports today in general and the amount of ship traffic. And you can see the cruise ships here as well as the very large container ships here. We keep following up. We don't give up. We look for details and we look for more information about these deals. You may remember the First Lady of Florida journalism, Andrea Shea King, first brought us this story 2.5 years ago. She was the one protesting, saying, where's the transparency in this port deal? We're giving control of this U.S. port. Remember, we had an earlier deal in 2008 for AUE ports that wanted to control 30 ports all in one go. Chuck Schumer stopped it and said, we want to piecemeal this thing. We want our percentage, basically, to piecemeal this. And so far, that we know of, overtly, 2 ports into the deal, where we've got this port here, in Port Canaveral, and then we've also got Port of Wilmington. And the interesting thing about this is a very interesting lack of oversight, very interesting lack of transparency in these deals. They're being made with Russian generals that run Rosbaron Export, which run companies which export and import missiles in containers. So that's dangerous. Importing and exporting missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, that's dangerous. Chemical weapons, that's dangerous. Biological weapons, that's dangerous. Almost no oversight here for this UAE ports deal. So this is really, Mary Fanning and Ellen Jones, when we first covered this story 2.5 years ago, wrote about this. They wrote about how 11 years of research by Lockheed, 4 missile in a box for the Army, had failed, and how this technology had been exfiltrated through potentially Skolkovo, through a think tank in Moscow. And now all of a sudden we're building these things in Tolyatti at Oleg Deripaska's plant on the Volga River in southern Russia. So and then the technology isn't yesterday's technology. It's the hypersonic second stage, 5 times the speed of sound technology, that if this large cruise ship behind me was an aircraft carrier, there's no defense, even with our Aegis defense system, there's no way to stop it. There's no way to stop it. It's an aircraft carrier killer. So we're not talking about insignificant technology. We're not talking about, we're talking about a no-bid deal. Remember that. There was a no-bid deal, and we're talking extremely long periods of time, 30-year period of time. So again, whatever side you are on this, Republican or Democrat, you have to look at it and say, this isn't a good idea for national security. Okay, so that's why we came here. That's why when we met the president, just right over here, when we met the president of the port, he didn't want to talk to us. We were at the space launch last night. You can see the Cemex plant, of course, of Lafarge fame. But that's certainly something that Carter Page was involved in that port deal. That would make sense that Carter Page would know the Russian general who's in on this deal, Sechin is the last name. It would make sense if Carter Page was involved in the Vladivostok to China port with Sechin, that he would know Sechin and could go over in the 2016 campaign and have a meeting with Sechin. It's easier to have a business meeting with a business partner than somebody you've never met before. If you've done a lot of deals and you were the, let's say, the investor's representative in the United States, if he was the go-between to the Russian company, which was Gazprom, to do this pipeline in China, you would have many meetings. You would be the envoy, especially if you were representing the military interest. You'd have a lot of meetings with Sechin's team. You would know all of Sechin's seconds, the people around him, and so forth. It would be fairly simple if you were trying to set up Trump, if you were trying to set up surveillance on Trump, to insert somebody like a Carter Page in the mix, to have him go over and create a cover story of him speaking at some Russian university about, spoons and forks for Vladivostok. But in actual fact, you're trying to create a surveillance situation. You're trying to create a lure. and a credible story that you were able to get Hillary's emails through hacking. And that lure could then be used throughout the campaign as sort of a CONUS lure, a continental United States lure, which is Carter Page, to do surveillance on all the people in the Trump orbit. The same thing won't show them. If you're doing a deal in the East Med pipeline, if you're doing a deal for the East Med pipeline, the same thing would be true. You would have a lot of meetings with the foreign ministers of all the different countries that were involved, supposedly have the emails, and then this, like Carter Page, meeting many people within the Trump campaign, like Paul Manafort, or George Papadopoulos. George Papadopoulos, between the people that supposedly have the emails, and then this, like Carter Page, meeting many people within the Trump campaign, like Paul Manafort, or George Papadopoulos. George Papadopoulos seems to be communicating a lot with Mike Flynn. There seems to be some contact points between Carter Page and Mike Flynn, but not a lot with Paul Manafort. And again, we know Paul Manafort has been running weapons for 30 years. If Paul Manafort's been running weapons for 30 years through Cyprus and brokering money for the Russians in the joint venture for deals like Club K, and brokering money for the NATO generals for deals like Club K, then we could create a black ledger for him. If we create a black ledger for him, let's go ahead and do that. Have Andrea Chalupa drop it in May of 2016 in the election, and then we can blacken Paul Manafort and get, again, all kinds of surveillance started on anybody that Paul Manafort talks to. The same thing is true, if you think about it, with Mike Flynn. If we have a UAE, another UAE deal that happens in 2015 with I think it's 7 different Arab kingdoms about a set of plants, about 45 different nuclear power plants. Again, or then we can have a meeting with Putin and a dinner with Putin. Again, we can set him up as a lure for everyone he meets with, and then we can do surveillance on everybody he meets with. And that is not just a theory. We have the metadata now that almost looks at every person that keeps being introduced into the surveillance picture, keeps mapping back with one of their IP addresses to Mike Flynn's Fort Huachuca, the home of Military Intelligence 111, the home of Military Intelligence 111. I'll go through the list. Sorry about the wind. OK Ansky, OK New York Ansky. Again, we think of him as a underling, a recruited crime figure in the Miami area, and he looks like, hey, he's just a trafficante apparatchik doing petty crime down there at the port. Well, we find out later he's 15 years as an FBI informant. 15 years as an FBI informant. Somebody who's posed as an arms buyer in Iran. Somebody who's posed as an arms buyer in North Korea. Somebody who would be the perfect go-between for secrets like this Club K. Okay, so again, all these people were presented in the Mueller report as spies, Russians. They were all presented as Russians. None of this was disclosed. None of these backgrounds were disclosed about any of the people that were being presented to us as the Russians that were hacking the election for Hillary Clinton, right? And it goes, Eric, CIA Marshmallow. Again, he has an IP address that maps him back to Fort Huachuca. We have other people like Hina Alvi mapping back again to Fort Huachuca. Is that the new place Muhammad Atta trained here at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, in Montgomery, before the 9/11? After 9/11, did they just move that capability when Mike Flynn moved there in 2001 to the military intelligence group at 111? Again, mainly for overseas intelligence gathering, but again, it can very easily be used for political operations as well. Not just shooting operations, but network gathering, network and information gathering. And again, we get half the story or maybe a quarter of the story through the IG. We don't get the full story that, hey, these Carter Page, 20 years as CIA informant. I remember when I said that. I remember how many people came out for the defense of Carter Page. I remember when I said about Papadopoulos. People just believe somehow the story that he met with 20 different intelligence officers in in London while getting hired for the Trump team and not communicating with many people in Trump, just sending out offers of Hillary's email, they still somehow believe that was helpful to Trump. They still somehow believe that him coming out in the press in London, quoted by the Daily Mail and the London papers, and being quoted as an advocate for Trump, they still somehow associate that he was a Trump supporter, right? And not somebody who was a part of allures. We go to the trials, we go to all the trials of all the people, Mike Flynn and so forth. We show you that the documents that were put together were called assessment.pdf. We show you that they hired a team of psychologists. And people just want to believe the images that are created rather than the metadata that ties all these people to military intelligence, to Fort Huachuca, to the 111th Brigade. And Mike Flynn really does tie the room together. People say, why would people do these deals 35 years? And no bid contract, remember. Why would they do it through a proxy like the UAE? Because you want to ship stuff to UAE that you don't want anybody to ask questions about. That's the bottom line. You want to do deals like Club K where there's no questions, that are buried and hidden in the deal, that you don't want to ask any questions about. If I'm Navy, I control the ports. If I'm the US Navy, I control the ports. You want to make money in the US Navy, pulling your Navy ship into port doesn't make you any money. Pulling your Navy ship into port doesn't make you any money. It may make a lot of these restaurants a lot of money, but it doesn't make you any money. What makes you money is what comes off the ship or what goes on the ship.